Okay, this is take 3. Hopefully, we won't have to suffer through too many interruptions in this take. 1 Corinthians 7, page 1110 in the Scriptures. Please read along in your own Bible. Paul speaking, and concerning the matters you wrote to me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Remember, Paul was abstinent. But because of whoring, and remember the Corinthians were known for not being abstinent, but because of whoring, let each one have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband. Let the husband render to his wife what is her due, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except with agreement for a time, to give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again so that Satan does not try you because of your lack of self-control. Don't weaponize sex against one another. Be fruitful and multiply. Man and woman will have urges. Good. Address those urges, those needs, those physical needs within the confines of your marriage. If you withhold, that creates an opportunity for temptation, which gives the enemy a foothold. And I say this as a concession, not as a command. For I wish that all men were even as I am myself. But each one has his own gift from Elohim, one in this way and another in that. And I say to the unmarried and to the widow, it is good for them if they remain even as I am. If you can be abstinent, be abstinent. But if they do not have self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. And to the married I command, not I, but the master, a wife should not separate from her husband. But if she is indeed separated, let her remain unmarried, or be restored to favor with her husband, and let a husband not send away a wife. And to the rest I say, not the master, Paul speaking, if any brother has an unbelieving wife, and she thinks well to live with him, let him not send her away. And a woman who has an unbelieving husband, and he thinks well to live with her, let her not send him away. For the unbelieving husband has been set apart in the wife, and the unbelieving wife has been set apart in the husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but now they are set apart. Now remember, the Corinthians are a group of believers amongst the heathens, and so the witness that a husband or a wife has to their significant other, to their partner here, is incredibly strong. Of course, there's a parallel here for us in today's day and age. But they were literally, whoring and idolatry was their thing. And we're going to get into that when Paul talks about food in chapter 8. But that witness that that wife or that husband has to their unbelieving, to their heathen significant other, could be the very thing that saves them. And if the unbelieving one separates, let him separate himself. A brother or a sister has not been enslaved in such matters, but Elohim has called us to peace. For how do you know, O wife, whether you shall save your husband? Or how do you know, O husband, whether you shall save your wife? Only as Elohim has distributed to each one, as the master has called each one, so let him walk. And so I order in all the assemblies. Was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not be circumcised. The circumcision is naught, and the uncircumcision is naught, but the guarding of the commands of Elohim does matter. Remember, there was this massive argument, this disagreement in Acts 15. We have these Gentile believers in Messiah, these heathen believers in Messiah. What do we do? And the argument was, well, clearly they have to get circumcised, because for the first 200 some odd years, Christianity was a sect of Judaism. It was Messianic Judaism. And a split happened after that. Had a lot to do with, well, Constantine, but even before that, the Jewish assemblies, the synagogues, were at first tolerating these Messianic believers. But enough of a rift was occurring between the Messianic believers and the Jews, the Yehudim, that the Jews began putting the Messianists, the Christians, out of the assemblies. And a lot of that has to do with the difference between condition of the heart, as taught by Yeshua, and the doctrines and dogmas of men, as taught by the Jews. Same thing that made the Pharisees and the Sadducees pissed off at Yeshua. My dog just jumped up and ran away. Must be something over there. So the circumcision is a physical manifestation, a physical representation of submission to Yah. But in Acts 15 it was argued, hey, shouldn't we deal with the big things first? Whoring, idolatry, strangulation, blood, which is exactly what Paul's going through here in Corinthians. So he's saying, hey, if you're circumcised, don't be uncircumcised. If you're not circumcised, don't worry about it yet. But the guarding of the commands of Elohim does matter. Keep the commands, bro. That's what we need you to do. Keep the commands. That's what matters. Let each one remain in the same calling in which he was called. Were you called while a slave? It matters not to you. But if you are able to become free too, rather use it. For he who was called in the master while a slave is the master's freed man. Likewise, he who was called while free is a slave to Messiah. You were bought with a price. You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. See, getting back to that doctrines and dogmas of men versus the commands of Yah. You were bought with a price, the blood of Yeshua. By the way, that circumcision, the whole circumcising the heart thing, because I see that argument quite a bit. You can go back to Deuteronomy 30, verse 6 on that one. You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. Remember that. That's an incredibly powerful verse. Brothers, let each one remain with Elohim in that calling in which he was called. And concerning maidens, I have no command from the master, but I give judgment as one whom the master in his compassion has made trustworthy. I think then that it is good because of the present necessity, that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? You're saying, hey, if you're a virgin, and you can, stay that way. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loosed from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But even if you should marry, you have not sinned. Again, remember Paul was abstinent. But even if you should marry, you have not sinned. And if a maiden should marry, she has not sinned. But such shall have pressure in the flesh, and I would spare you. That pressure in the flesh. Getting back to that whole, hey, you're going to have urges. It's best to address those urges within the confines of a marriage. Because if you address those urges outside the confines of a marriage, that literally is sin. That is transgression of the law. And we're reinforced right up here in verse 19. The guarding of the commands of Elohim does matter. And I say this, brothers, verse 29, the time is short, so that from now on even those who have wives should be as though they had none, and those who weep as though they did not weep, and those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice, and those who buy as though they did not possess, and those who use this world as not misusing it. For the scene of this world is passing away. And I wish you to be without concern. He who is unmarried is concerned about the matters of the master, how to please the master. But he who is married is concerned about the matters of the world, how to please his wife. Sometimes it gets put on a pedestal. What Paul's saying here is if you are not concerned about pleasing a wife or a household, you have more time to please the master. I would say a valid argument. But also, be fruitful and multiply. There's a balance here. Yet again, somebody trying to call me. There is a difference between a wife and a maiden. The unmarried woman is concerned about the matters of the master, that she might be set apart both in body and in spirit. But she who is married is concerned about the matters of the world, how to please her husband. And this I say for your own good, not to put a restraint on you, but for what is proper, and to attend to the master without distraction. getting that relationship, that hierarchy correct. And if anyone thinks he is behaving improperly towards his maiden, if she is past the flower of her youth, and so it should be, let him do what he desires. He does not sin. Let them marry. But he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, and has authority over his own desire, and has so decided in his heart to guard his own maiden, does well. So then he who gives her in marriage does well, but he who does not give her in marriage does better. A wife is bound by Torah as long as her husband lives, and if her husband dies, she is free to be married to whom she desires, only in the master. But she is better off if she remains as she is, according to my opinion, and I think I have the spirit of Elohim. And concerning food offered to idols, this was a big deal, and it's applicable today, but more of in a metaphoric sense rather than a literal sense. These heathens, these pagans, they would have these huge feasts, and they would slaughter to their false gods, and they would have food, and they would eat food. And many of the members of the church in Corinth were invited by their friends, their family. Remember, we're talking about Gentile heathen believers in Messiah to these feasts. And as part of this, it was customary for the leftovers to be distributed out to those that had food or had a need of food rather than throw it away. And so there was a concern about the eating of this food that was sacrificed to idols. And Paul touches on it in 8, but we'll see more in 10 when we get there. That he goes much further in depth in 10. So the question becomes, do we or don't we eat food that was sacrificed to idols? Now remember, Yeshua taught condition of the heart. And concerning food offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone thinks that he knows somewhat, he does not yet know as he should know. But if anyone loves Elohim, this one is known by him. Love Elohim. Remember, the guarding of the commands of Elohim does matter. 1 Corinthians 7:19. So then, concerning the eating of food offered to idols, remember, food is defined in Leviticus 11. Nowhere in the Bible will you find an argument or description saying that food used to be this, but now it's this. That argument is made by a lot of men and women, but it's not biblical. The Bible defines food in Leviticus 11, and that description of food does not change throughout the Word. So concerning food offered to idols, we know that an idol is no matter at all in the world, and that there is no Elohim but one. He's like, okay, so food was slaughtered in front of a piece of rock or a wood carving. Okay, Elohim's still Elohim. For even if there are so-called mighty ones, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many mighty ones and many masters, for us there is one Elohim. That's an interesting phrase right there. The Father from whom all came and for whom we live, and one Master, Yeshua Messiah, through whom all came and through whom we live. False gods, pagan demigods, so forth and so on. Me speaking, not Paul speaking. I believe this has to do with Genesis 6 and the Watchers, the fallen angels, and the Nephilim, their offspring. Because if we flip back there and we look, if we go to Genesis, there are mosquitoes out right now. It's hoodie weather with skeeters. Very strange. There's one on top of my head at this very moment. I'm trying to use every bit of self-control I have to not just smash it. Genesis 6, and it came to be when men began to increase on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of Elohim saw the daughters of men, that they were good. And they took wives for themselves, all whom they chose. And Yahweh said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever in his going astray. He is flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of Elohim came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, the men of name. Other translations say the men of renown. Odin, Zeus, pick your poison. Demigods, half angel, half human. Me speaking, I think that's what this is referring to. And I was in satanic metal bands for a decade. I know a lot of atheists. I know a lot of pagans. I know a lot of agnostics. And I've had people say, well, I know that Odin is powerful. Maybe. Is he Elohim? No. That's the point that Paul is making. Yeah. Okay. There's many mighty ones. They all come from Elohim. Those fallen angels came from Elohim. The daughters of men that they had offspring with came from Elohim. That all comes from Elohim. And so, do you worship the offspring of Elohim, or do you worship Elohim? My interpretation, my opinion on what's going on here. So back to 1 Corinthians 8:5. For even if there are so-called mighty ones, whether in heaven or in earth, as there are many mighty ones and many masters, for us there is one Elohim, the Father, from whom all came and for whom we live, and one Master, Yeshua Messiah, through whom all came and through whom we live. However, not all have this knowledge. Not everybody understands this relationship that we just discussed. But some, being aware of the idol, until now eat it as having been offered to an idol, so their conscience, being weak, is defiled. But food does not commend us to Elohim, for we are none the better if we eat, nor any worse for not eating. But look to it, lest somehow this right of yours becomes a stumbling block to those who are weak. This right of yours, that pagan ritual of slaughtering to false gods before mealtime. So look to it, lest somehow this right of yours becomes a stumbling block to those who are weak. To those that don't understand that the idols that food was slaughtered to are nothing compared to Elohim, these early Christians, you don't want you, as a Christian, as a believer in Messiah who's partaking of that, you don't want them to see you're partaking of that and think that it's okay, and it becomes a stumbling block for them. For if anyone sees you have knowledge, if you know better, eating at an idol's place, shall not his conscience, if he is weak, be built up to eat food offered to idols? If they see you doing it, they're going to think it's okay, then they're going to do it too. So this weak brother, for whom Messiah died, shall perish through your knowledge. Now, sinning in this way against the brothers and wounding their weak conscience, you sin against Messiah. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I am never going to eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. If it's going to be an issue, I ain't going to do it, says Paul. And I'm going to leave y'all with that today. We'll pick up in 9 on 10 next week, and Paul goes into quite a bit more depth in 10 as to what he means by food offered to idols and the downstream ramifications of that. Bless y'all. Shalom.